The building I was asked to inspect does not appear on any county plat map. And as of this morning, the complaint that sent me there has been removed from our system. I want to be clear about that from the start. I printed a copy of the original intake form before it disappeared. I have the printout in a filing cabinet in my garage. The case number is still valid. The database field where it should appear is blank. My name is Paul Kershaw. I spent 22 years as a building code inspector for Harmon County in the western foothills of North Carolina. Most of my work involved residential additions, failed septic systems, unpermitted decks, and the occasional commercial project that a contractor tried to slide past the planning office. It is not exciting work. It is not wilderness work. I drove a county truck to properties within the jurisdiction, measured things, compared them to approved plans, wrote reports, and moved on. I was good at it because I was patient and because I read documents carefully. And those are the only two skills the job actually requires. In April of 2024, I received a complaint referral from the planning department concerning a property on Briar Fork Road, about 11 miles outside of Delwood. Briar Fork Road is a county-maintained gravel road that runs along the southern edge of the Pisgah National Forest boundary for roughly 4 miles before it dead ends at a private gate. It serves maybe 15 residential properties, most of them on parcels ranging from 3 to 40 acres. The terrain out there is steep. Hardwood forest, rhododendron thickets along every drainage, sandstone ledges where the ridgelines break. The road follows a creek for the first 2 miles, then climbs through a series of switchbacks to a bench where the older homesteads sit. It is not remote in the way people imagine when they think of wilderness. You can see cell towers from the high points. There is a volunteer fire station 7 minutes away. But the forest is thick enough, and the hollows are deep enough that you can stand on one property and have no idea what is happening on the next one over. The complaint was filed by a man named Dale Fry, who owned 42 acres on the upper section of Briar Fork. Dale was 71, a retired electrician, and a reliable source. He had called the county before once about a neighbor's retaining wall that was failing, once about a culvert that the road crew had installed at the wrong grade. Both times he was right. His new complaint was about the parcel adjacent to his, a 68-acre tract that had been purchased 18 months earlier by a company called Ridgeline Technical Services, LLC. Dale reported that construction activity had been ongoing for several months. He described truck traffic at unusual hours, concrete deliveries, the sound of heavy equipment operating after dark, and a security gate installed across what had previously been a shared access easement. None of that is inherently unusual. People buy rural land and build on it. But Dale's complaint included a specific detail that the planning office flagged before passing it to me. He said the construction appeared to be going into the ground. If you find yourself interested in cases like this, where ordinary professional work leads somewhere that the paperwork can't quite account for, you might want to subscribe to Ashwarden Horror. This channel covers incidents reported by people whose jobs brought them face to face with things their training never anticipated. I pulled the parcel records for the Ridgeline property the day I received the referral. The land had last changed hands in 2022, sold by the estate of a woman named Clara Hodges, who had owned it since 1974. The sale price was $410,000, which was high for that area, but not absurd. The parcel had road frontage and a well. Ridgeline Technical Services was registered in Delaware, which meant the ownership structure was opaque but legal. There was no building permit on file. There was no grading permit. There was no septic permit. There was no electrical permit. There was nothing. That was the actual issue. Not the construction itself, but the complete absence of any permitting. In Harmon County, you cannot pour a foundation without a permit. You cannot grade more than 5,000 square feet without a land disturbance permit. You cannot install a driveway culvert without notifying the road department. And according to every record I could access, Ridgeline Technical Services had done none of this. I drove out to Briar Fork Road on April 16th. It was a Tuesday, overcast, in the low 50s. The road was in its usual spring condition, soft gravel, standing water in the low spots, one downed limb that I moved off the road near the second switchback. I passed the Fry property and continued about a quarter-mile to where the new gate was. It was substantial. Steel tube construction, 12 feet wide, mounted on concrete piers that were set into the roadbed shoulders. The gate itself was painted flat black, which is unusual. Most rural gates out here are galvanized or painted to match the landscape. There was a keypad on the left pier and a small camera housing above it. No signage, no company name, no private property placard, which is actually required by county ordinance when a gate restricts access to a shared easement. I parked my truck, took photographs of the gate, the camera, the piers, and the road surface on either side. The gravel in front of the gate showed consistent tire tracks, heavy vehicles, dual rear axle. The mud on the shoulders had been recently graded. Someone was maintaining this entrance carefully. I pressed the intercom button on the keypad. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds. Then a voice came through. Male, flat, professional. "Can I help you?" It was not a question. It was the kind of sentence that ends with a period even when spoken aloud. I identified myself, gave my badge number, explained that I was responding to a code compliance inquiry and needed to inspect the property for unpermitted construction. There was a pause. "This property is under a federal special use authorization. County inspection is not applicable. You'll need to contact our project office for documentation." He gave me a phone number. I wrote it down. He did not give me a name. I have heard versions of this before. People with money sometimes believe that hiring a lawyer or invoking a federal connection exempts them from local building codes. It almost never does. County building code applies to structures within county jurisdiction, regardless of who owns the land or what federal permits might exist for the use of the land itself. A Forest Service special use permit, for example, authorizes the use of federal land. It does not override state and county construction codes. The two systems are parallel. I called the number from my truck. It rang 6 times and went to a voicemail that identified itself only as Hawana Project Office, Ridgeline Technical. I left a message explaining the complaint, the permitting deficiency, and the requirement for an inspection. I said I would return within 5 business days if I did not receive a response. Then I drove to the Fry property and spoke to Dale. He was waiting on his porch, which did not surprise me. Dale was the kind of man who tracked vehicle sounds on his road the way other people check their email. He had coffee ready, which I accepted. "They've been at it since October," he said. "First couple weeks was just surveyors. Then the grading started. Then the concrete trucks." I asked him how many concrete trucks. I stopped counting at 20. 20 concrete trucks is a lot of concrete for a residential project. It is a lot of concrete for most commercial projects. I asked if he had seen what was being built. "That's the thing," he said. "I can't see anything. The grade drops off behind that first tree line, and whatever they're doing is below the ridge. But I can hear it. I can feel it sometimes, not like an earthquake, more like a vibration that comes up through the floor. My dog won't go near the fence line anymore." I asked about the truck traffic timing. "Mostly at night, between 10 and 2 in the morning. Flatbeds, box trucks, a couple of those lowboy trailers you'd use for heavy equipment." They come up the road with their lights on, go through the gate, and then nothing. Never hear them leave. I mean, I'm sure they do leave, but I'm usually asleep by 3. I asked if he had approached anyone at the site. Once, back in November, I walked down to the gate before they put the camera up. A man met me there. Young guy, very polite, said they were doing geological survey work and remediation for a private client. Gave me a card. Dale produced the card from a kitchen drawer. It read, Ridgeline Technical Services, Environmental Assessment and Site Remediation. Below that was the same phone number the gate intercom had given me, and an address in Raleigh that I later confirmed was a registered agent service, essentially a mailbox. I thanked Dale, finished my coffee, and drove back to the office. On the way, I passed the gate again and noticed something I had missed. There were utility markings on the road shoulder about 200 feet before the gate. Fresh paint. Orange for telecommunications, red for electrical. Someone had called in a utility locate request recently, which meant either new utility lines were being installed or existing ones were being modified. I photographed the markings. Back at the office, I did what I always do when a property owner claims federal exemption. I called the Forest Service Ranger District office in Pisgah. A woman named Terry answered. I explained the situation and asked whether Ridgeline Technical Services held a special use authorization for any parcel adjacent to the National Forest boundary. "Let me check," she said. I heard typing, then a long pause. "I don't see anything under that name. What was the parcel number?" I gave it to her. "That's private land," she said. "We wouldn't issue a special use permit for private land. That's only for activities on National Forest System land." The individual at the gate told me the property was under a federal special use authorization. That doesn't make sense, unless they have a permit for something on our side of the boundary. "Let me look at the boundary." More typing. "That parcel does border the forest, the south and west sides, but I don't see any active permits for that section. We have a couple of old communication site leases further north, and there's a road easement that's been inactive since the 80s. Nothing current near Briar Fork." I asked about the inactive road easement. "Hang on." She pulled it up. "It's a Forest Service Road FSR 4417, authorized in 1962. It runs from Briar Fork Road south into the forest for about 1.5 miles. The permit holder was, let me see it, just says Department of Defense. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The authorization expired in 1991 and was not renewed." An Army Corps road? We've got a few of those. Cold War stuff. Some of them went to communication relay stations, some to survey points. Most of the infrastructure was removed decades ago. The roads usually just get decommissioned and the forest takes them back. I asked if FSR 4417 had been decommissioned. She checked. I don't see a decommission order, but the permit expired, so technically access authority ended in 91. The road might still physically exist, or it might be completely overgrown. Nobody's maintained it on our end. I thanked her and made a note. An expired Army Corps road easement adjoining the Ridgeline property. Probably nothing. Cold War-era infrastructure in the southern Appalachians is common enough that it is usually unremarkable. Communication relays, survey markers, equipment storage. Most of it was cleared out before I was born. I filed my initial inspection report and noted the failed contact, the permitting deficiency, and the claim of federal authorization. I set a 5-day follow-up, standard procedure. Nobody from Ridgeline called back. On April 22nd, I returned to Briar Fork Road with a formal notice of violation. If a property owner does not respond to an initial inquiry and there is visible evidence of unpermitted construction, we are authorized to post a stop work order on the property boundary and send a copy to the registered agent by certified mail. The gate was closed. I pressed the intercom. This time, nobody answered. I waited 5 minutes and pressed it again. Nothing. I posted the notice on the gate, which I was legally permitted to do since the gate was on a county right-of-way. I photographed the posting. Then I walked along the fence line to the east, where Dale's property bordered the ridgeline tract. The fence was new 8-foot chain link with privacy slats, which struck me as unusual for a rural property. Through a gap where the slats had been bent by a fallen branch, I could see the terrain drop away on the other side into a wooded hollow. About 300 feet down the slope, I could make out a flat area that had been recently cleared and graded. The soil was that orange-red clay you see everywhere in the North Carolina foothills. But the cleared area was not the footprint of a building. It was more like a loading area, a wide, flat pad with what looked like a concrete apron leading to the slope face. Into the slope face, I could see the top of an opening. It was partially obscured by the angle and the vegetation, but it looked like a cut in the hillside, a portal, the kind you see at mine entrances or tunnel approaches. The concrete apron ran directly into it. I took what photographs I could from outside the fence line. The angle was poor and the distance was considerable. In the images, you can see the cleared area, the concrete, and the shadow of the opening, but not much detail. I went back to the office and started pulling records more aggressively. I searched for Ridgeline Technical Services in every database I had access to: State Business Registry, Federal Contractor Registrations, SEC filings, county tax records. The company was real, registered, current on its filings, and almost completely opaque. Its registered agent was a corporate services firm in Wilmington, Delaware. Its officers were listed as initials only, which Delaware permits. Its stated business purpose was technical consulting and infrastructure services. It had no public contracts that I could find. It had no website. It had no online presence of any kind except its registration documents. I searched the property tax records. Ridgeline was paying its property taxes, which were current. The assessed value had not been updated since the purchase, which meant nobody had inspected the property to reassess it after the construction. That was partly our fault. Reassessment usually happens after a building permit is issued, and since there was no permit, the system had not flagged it. I also pulled the utility records. Harmon County does not provide water or sewer to Briar Fork Road. Residents use wells and septic, but the electric cooperative does serve the area. I called the co-op and asked about service to the Ridgeline parcel. That account was established in January 2023, the clerk told me. 3-phase service. 3-phase power is industrial. Residential properties use single-phase. You request 3-phase when you need to run heavy equipment, large HVAC systems, commercial machinery, or, I thought, a facility that operates continuously. The installation of 3-phase service to a property with no building permit should have generated a flag somewhere. It hadn't. I spent the next 2 days compiling my findings. Unpermitted construction, no grading permit, no septic permit, no building permit, a claim of federal authorization that the relevant federal agency could not confirm, a Delaware LLC with minimal public information, 3-phase industrial power, 20-plus concrete deliveries, nighttime truck traffic, and what appeared to be a tunnel entrance cut into a hillside. I submitted the file to my supervisor, Gary Letterman, on April 24th. Gary had been with the county for 30 years. He was careful, thorough, and not easily impressed. He read my report, looked at the photographs, and was quiet for a minute. "You think this is military?" he said. "I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it doesn't have permits. And the Forest Service says they don't have a current authorization." "Correct." Gary leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to make some calls. Don't go back out there until I talk to you." That was unusual. Gary was not the type to tell me to stand down on a code violation. Our authority was clear, our documentation was solid, and the property owner had failed to respond to 2 contact attempts. By procedure, the next step was a formal citation and a referral to the county attorney for enforcement. Gary called me into his office 2 days later. He closed the door, which he almost never did. I spoke with the county attorney. He spoke with someone at the regional level. I don't know who that person spoke with. But I was told this morning that the Ridgeline property is covered under a federal facility authorization that supersedes county building code jurisdiction. What authorization? They didn't specify. I was told that documentation would be provided to the county attorney's office and that the complaint should be administratively closed. "Gary, there's no permit on file. There's no authorization on file. We have visible evidence of major unpermitted construction. I've got a legitimate complainant who's dealing with construction noise, truck traffic, and a blocked easement." "I know. So we're just closing it?" The county attorney advised that we close the inspection and refer any further inquiries to his office. He handed me a printout. It was a single paragraph on county letterhead, but written in language that I'd never seen in a county document. It stated that the inspection case was being closed under Section 14.3 of the County Code, which covers properties exempt from local building inspection due to federal preemption. I had never used Section 14.3. I had to look it up. It was real. It existed in our code as a provision for federally owned or federally authorized facilities that fall under separate construction oversight. Military bases, federal courthouses, post offices, that kind of thing. But the Ridgeline property was privately owned. It was not a federal installation. A Delaware LLC had purchased it on the open market. Whatever was being built there was being built by a private company on private land. I said this to Gary. "I understand your concern," he said. "I've documented your objection in the file. The decision has been made." That should have been the end of it. Administratively, it was. The complaint was closed. The case was marked resolved. Dale Fry received a form letter stating that the matter had been reviewed and that the construction activity on the adjacent property was authorized under applicable regulations. But I still had the utility markings on the road. I still had the concrete apron. I still had a tunnel entrance cut into a hillside with no engineering plans, no geotechnical report, no environmental review, and no public record of any kind. And I still had the expired Army Corps Road easement, FSR 4417, which according to the Forest Service's own maps, ran from Briar Fork Road directly south into the National Forest in the exact direction that the tunnel entrance appeared to face. I began to consider the possibility that the tunnel was not going into the Ridgeline property. It was going through it. Whatever was beneath that hillside, the actual facility might not be on private land at all. It might be under the National Forest. And if that were the case, then the private parcel was not the site. It was the door. Part 2. I want to be precise about what I did next, because the sequence matters, and because some of it was outside my normal authority. I was not a law enforcement officer. I was not a federal investigator. I was a county building inspector who had been told to close a case, and I closed it. What I did afterward, I did on my own time, using public records and my own vehicle. And I want that distinction to be clear. The first thing I did was request the original authorization documents for FSR 4417. Terry at the Ranger District had given me the basics. Army Corps of Engineers, authorized 1962, expired 1991. But I wanted the actual paperwork. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Forest Service Regional Office in Asheville on April 29th. I also filed a separate FOIA request with the Army Corps of Engineers, Wilmington District, asking for any records related to construction, survey, or infrastructure projects associated with the Briar Fork Road Corridor or the FSR 4417 easement. While I waited for those, I did something simpler. I drove to the Harmon County Register of Deeds office and pulled the full chain of title for the Ridgeline property going back as far as the records allowed. Clara Hodges had owned it since 1974. Before Clara, it belonged to her father, Emmett Briggs, who had purchased it in 1953. Before Emmett, the land had been part of a larger tract held by a timber company that had sold off parcels throughout the late 40s and early 50s after the timber was cut. Nothing unusual there. But the 1953 deed for Emmett Briggs contained an easement notation I almost missed. It was handwritten in the margin, in the registrar's notation style of the era. And it referenced a perpetual subsurface easement retained by the United States of America, as granted under instrument recorded at Book 114, page 312. Book 114, page 312. I asked the clerk to pull it. The instrument was a one-page document dated March 1952, signed by a representative of the General Services Administration, granting the United States a perpetual easement for subsurface access, maintenance, and improvement beneath the property then owned by the timber company. The easement was not limited to a specific depth. It was not limited to a specific footprint. It granted unrestricted subsurface rights to the federal government beneath the entire parcel in perpetuity. And it had been recorded a full year before Emmett Briggs bought the surface. Emmett had purchased the surface rights to a property that the federal government already owned underneath. I sat in the register's office for a while with that document on the table in front of me. A perpetual subsurface easement, recorded in 1952, never extinguished, never modified, carried forward silently through every subsequent deed transfer. Clara Hodges had owned the surface for 50 years. She may never have known what was beneath it. And when Ridgeline Technical Services purchased the property in 2022, they either knew about the easement, or they were the mechanism by which someone who knew decided to use the door again. I made copies of everything. Certified copies, which the register's office provides for a small fee. I put them in a folder, and I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen, and I thought about what I actually had. I had a federal subsurface easement from 1952 beneath a private parcel adjacent to a national forest. I had an Army Corps road easement from 1962 that provided surface access from the same parcel into the forest. I had a private company with no public profile building a tunnel entrance on the private parcel, aimed directly at the national forest. And I had a county attorney who had been instructed to close my inspection under a federal preemption clause. The pieces fit. They did not explain what was down there, but they fit. On May 6th, I got a partial response to my Forest Service FOIA request. Partial because the responsive documents had been referred to another office for review. What I received was a cover letter and 3 pages of maps. The maps showed the FSR 4417 corridor as it had been surveyed in 1961. The road ran from Briar Fork Road south-southwest for 1.3 miles, climbing through a series of switchbacks to a ridge saddle, then descending into a hollow on the National Forest side. The terminus of the road was marked with a small square symbol and the notation, Site 1117. There was no legend explaining what Site 1117 was. I searched the Forest Service's land management database for the designation. Nothing. I searched the National Archives catalog. Nothing. I searched the General Services Administration's Federal Real Property Profile, which is supposed to list all federally owned or leased facilities. Site 1117 did not appear. The Army Corps FOIA response arrived on May 14th, and it was more informative, though probably not in the way anyone intended. The responsive documents consisted of 6 pages of construction correspondence from 1952 and 1953. Most of it was administrative contract modifications, material requisitions, payment authorizations. But one letter, dated September 1953, from a Corps project manager to an office identified only by a routing code, referenced completion of Phase 1 tunnel lining, eastern approach, and noted that the primary chamber excavation is proceeding on schedule. The letter further stated that ventilation shaft number 3 has been completed to grade and capped per specification. A primary chamber, ventilation shafts, tunnel lining. This was not a communication relay or a survey station. This was a substantial underground facility, constructed in the early 1950s beneath national forest land, access through a tunnel that began on what was then timber company property. And, as far as I could determine, it did not appear in any current federal property inventory. I called Terry at the Ranger District again. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a long time. "I've worked this district for 11 years, she said. Nobody has ever mentioned a Site 1117. Is there anyone who might know? Someone who's been around longer? She thought about it. There's a guy named Phil Osteen who retired from the district in 2018. He was here for almost 30 years. If there was something on the landscape that people talked about, Phil would know. She gave me Phil's phone number. I called him that evening. Phil Osteen was 73 and lived about 40 minutes from the district office in a small house outside of Waynesville. He answered on the second ring. I explained who I was, not a Forest Service employee, but a county inspector who had stumbled onto something during a building code case. I asked him about the Briar Fork Road area and whether he had ever heard of Site 1117. "Where did you get that number?" he said. "Army Corps documents from the 50s. He was quiet. I heard him adjust in a chair. "I went in there once," he said, "or near it, in the mid-90s. We were doing a boundary survey on the south side of the Briar Fork drainage, and I walked FSR 4417 to see what condition it was in. The road was mostly grown over by then, but you could still follow the bench cuts. I followed it to the end and found a concrete pad and a steel door set into the hillside. There was a small clearing around it, maybe 30 by 40 feet. The door had a hasp and a government padlock, the old brass ones, and there was a sign bolted to the rock face that said, U.S. Government Property, No Trespassing, with a GSA inventory number. I wrote it down. When I got back to the office, I asked my supervisor about it. What did he say? He said he didn't know what it was. He said it wasn't a Forest Service facility. He told me to note it in my field report and leave it alone. Did you? I noted it, and I left it alone. But I did look up the GSA number later. Couldn't find it in any database. I tried again a few years later when we got better computer access. Still nothing. It's like the inventory number was real, but the inventory entry was pulled. I asked him about the condition of the site, whether there were any signs of active use. The door was locked, not rusted. The concrete was clean. No leaf litter on the pad, which was strange because everything else out there was buried in duff. Somebody was maintaining it. I didn't see a vehicle track, but there might have been one coming in from the east side that I didn't walk. From the east side, from the direction of the Ridgeline property. Phil, did you ever go back? No. I retired in 2018, and by then it had been 20 years. I figured whatever it was somebody else's problem. He paused. You said there's construction on the Briar Fork parcel now. There's a tunnel entrance going into the hillside, aimed south toward the forest. They're reopening the eastern approach, he said. And the way he said it, flat, certain, like a man confirming something he had expected for years, told me that Phil had spent more time thinking about Site 1117 than his casual tone suggested. I spent the rest of May assembling a file. I organized the deed records, the easement, the FOIA responses, the maps, the utility records, Dale's complaint, my inspection photographs, and my notes from the conversations with Terry and Phil. I was not building a legal case. I was not trying to force the county to reopen the inspection. I wanted to understand the shape of what I was looking at before I decided what, if anything, to do with it. On June 3rd, I drove to the Forest Service Ranger District office in person. Terry met me in the lobby. I had told her I was coming and roughly why. She brought me to a small conference room, and I laid out the documents. I showed her the 1952 subsurface easement. I showed her the Army Corps construction correspondence. I showed her the FSR 4417 maps with the Site 1117 notation. I showed her my inspection photographs of the tunnel entrance. And I showed her the county attorney's closure letter citing federal preemption. Terry studied the documents for about 20 minutes without speaking. Then she picked up her desk phone and called her district ranger. His name was Mike Cahill. He came to the conference room, looked at the documents, and his first question was practical. Is this on our land? The access road and the surface site Phil Osteen described are on National Forest System land, Terry said. The construction on the private parcel appears to be connecting to the same subsurface structure. And we have no record of a current authorization. No, the road easement expired in 1991. There's no active special use permit. Mike sat down and read the core letter about the tunnel lining and primary chamber. He read it twice. This is a continuity of government facility, he said. Or it was. I asked him what he meant. In the 50s and 60s, the federal government built dozens of underground facilities in the eastern mountains. Bunkers, communication nodes, relocation sites. Some of them are well-known Raven Rock, Mount Weather, the Greenbrier. Others were smaller. Regional relay points, equipment caches, alternate command posts. Most of them were decommissioned and either transferred to other agencies or abandoned. But a few of them... He stopped. A few of them what? There were always rumors that some sites were kept active off the books, maintained under interagency agreements that didn't go through normal channels, the kind of thing where the paperwork exists, but it's filed in a place where nobody would look unless they already knew what they were looking for. Like a GSA inventory number with no matching inventory entry, I said. Mike looked at me. Like that? Yes. He told me he would escalate the matter to the regional forester's office. He asked if I would be willing to share copies of my documents. I agreed, with the condition that I retained my originals. He made copies on the office machine while I watched. 2 weeks later, Terry called me. She said the regional office had acknowledged receipt of the documents and had initiated a review. She also said that she had been told not to discuss the matter further with me, which she was telling me because she thought I deserved to know. I did not hear from the Forest Service again. On June 21st, I drove out to Briar Fork Road on my own time. I wanted to see whether anything had changed at the Ridgeline Gate. The gate was closed, the camera was still there, but my stop work notice had been removed. In its place, bolted to the left gate pier, was a small metal sign. It was green with white lettering, the standard format used by federal agencies for facility identification. It read, U.S. Government Property, Authorized Personnel Only. Below that, in smaller type, Facility 1117-E, GSA Region 4. The sign was new. The bolt holes were clean, the paint was fresh, and the mounting hardware was stainless steel. Someone had responded to my inquiries not by providing the county with documentation, but by putting up a sign. I photographed it. I sat in my truck for a while. Dale Fry came walking down the road about 10 minutes later, which I expected. He leaned on my passenger window. You see the sign, he said. I see it. That went up last week, Tuesday night. I heard a truck, but I didn't see who did it. Dale, has the construction noise changed at all? It stopped about 2 weeks ago, completely. No trucks, no equipment, no vibration. But the lights are on. I can see a glow through the trees at night. Not bright, just a steady light coming up from the hollow, like they finished building whatever it was and turned it on. I drove home. I was not angry exactly. Frustration would be more accurate, though even that is too strong. What I felt was a kind of professional dissonance. My entire career was built on the premise that construction within the county was subject to the county's code. That premise was foundational. And what I had watched over the past 2 months was that premise being quietly, politely, and completely overridden by a system that did not need my permission and did not owe me an explanation. The federal preemption was probably legal. The subsurface easement was recorded and valid. Whatever Facility 1117 was, it appeared to have been authorized at some point by a legitimate federal process, even if that process had been designed to avoid the kind of records that people like me knew how to search. And Ridgeline Technical Services, whatever it actually was, had been used to reopen the eastern access point on private land in a way that minimized public visibility. Buy the surface, bring in a contractor, gate the road, build the entrance. If a local inspector shows up, invoke preemption and wait for the bureaucracy to confirm it. The system worked. I know this because I was the system that it worked on. In July, I made one more attempt to understand what was actually down there. I filed a FOIA request with the General Services Administration for all records associated with Facility 1117 and the inventory number Phil Osteen had written down 20 years earlier. The response came in August. It was 3 sentences long. It acknowledged that records responsive to my request existed. It stated that those records were exempt from disclosure under FOIA Exemption 1, which covers classified national security information, and Exemption 3, which covers information specifically exempted by other statutes. The response did not identify which statute applied under Exemption 3. That was the first confirmation I received that the facility was classified. Not just unrecorded, not just overlooked, classified. I shared the response with Gary. He read it and handed it back. Paul, what do you want to happen here? I did not have a good answer. I did not want to shut the facility down. I did not want to expose a national security operation. I did not want to make trouble for Dale Fry, who still lived next to a property that had become something he had no power to influence. What I wanted was for the system I worked in to make sense. I wanted the permits and the records and the inspections to account for the physical reality. And they didn't. They never had. The facility had existed since 1953 without appearing in any record system that a county employee, a Forest Service ranger, or a retired district veteran could access. It had been maintained for 70 years by a process that operated beneath every layer of government that was visible to the public. And now, it had been upgraded. The Eastern approach had been rebuilt with modern materials, industrial power, and a private company front. Whatever Facility 1117 was for communication, continuity, storage, command, someone had decided it was needed again. And the method for reactivating it was exactly the same method that had been used to build it originally. Buy access through the private surface. Build on private land. Let the public records show a Delaware LLC with a vague business description and a clean tax payment. If anyone asks, invoke preemption and wait. I retired from Harmon County in February of 2025. My decision was not directly because of the Briar Fork case, but it contributed. 22 years of enforcing building codes had given me a specific understanding of how the built environment was documented and controlled. The Ridgeline property showed me the edge of that understanding. There was a layer beneath it that I had never had reason to encounter. And once I saw it, the ordinary confidence I brought to my work did not fully recover. Dale Fry still lives on Briar Fork Road. The last time I spoke to him was in January. He said the gate was still closed, the sign was still there, and the glow at night was still visible. He also said that the road had been repaved, not by the county. Smooth asphalt from the Ridgeline gate all the way down to the county road junction. No work order, no contract, no crew that anyone in the neighborhood recognized. It was just done one day, overnight, and in the morning the gravel road was asphalt, and the drainage culverts had been replaced with new ones. Dale said he called the county road department to ask about it. They told him they had no record of any paving on Briar Fork Road. I keep the file in my garage. The certified copies, the photographs, the FOIA responses, the GSA denial, the maps, the notes. I keep them because they are the only proof that I did my job correctly. The case in our database is closed. The complaint is gone. The only digital trace is a case number that leads to an empty field. But the file is real. The documents are real. And the facility beneath that forest is real and operational in a way it has not been since the early Cold War. What I cannot resolve, and this is the thing I want to say carefully, because it is not a suspicion, it is a measured observation, is the timeline. The subsurface easement was recorded in 1952. The Army Corps correspondence describes tunnel construction in 1953. Phil Osteen found a maintained facility in the mid-90s, decades after the road easement had expired. And Ridgeline Technical Services purchased the surface parcel in 2022 to rebuild the eastern entrance. That facility was never decommissioned. The road easement expired, but the subsurface easement did not. Someone maintained the site through every administration, every budget cycle, every reorganization, every Forest Service Management Plan revision for over 70 years. Not by hiding it, by placing it in records that were technically public but structured so that no one would ever assemble them into a single picture. I assembled them, a building inspector, because a retired electrician filed a complaint about a blocked easement and some nighttime concrete trucks. That is what I cannot stop thinking about. Not what the facility is for, I accept that I may never know that. And I have made a kind of peace with it. What unsettles me is how perfectly the system worked. Every record I found was real. Every document was properly filed. Every legal instrument was valid. Nothing was forged. Nothing was hidden in the way people imagine secrets are hidden. It was all there, in county deed books and federal archives and GSA databases, distributed across enough separate systems that no single inquiry would ever collect it all. It took a code violation to bring the pieces into one room. And the moment they were assembled, the system acknowledged them, reclassified the gate with a clean new sign, and resumed operating as if my involvement had been a minor maintenance issue, a surface irregularity, briefly exposed, efficiently repaired. The last document in my file is a property tax statement for the Ridgeline parcel, dated November 2024. It lists the property use classification as vacant rural land. The assessed improvement value is 0. There is a 68-acre parcel in the foothills of North Carolina with 3-phase industrial power, a steel security gate, a concrete tunnel entrance, and a steady glow visible through the trees at night. And according to Harmon County, there is nothing built on it at all.